a gentle reminder to slow me down. One step equation. So we're going to keep simple. I know you guys were taught so well this last year, and this is absolutely refresher. I'm just going to do my language and show you the vocab words that we're going to use all year long, okay? So we know the goal here is to get m by itself, right? And you can do this in your head. If you can't do it in your head, I'd be surprised. But the skill here is to use the process of additive inverse and multiplicative inverse. And that's what you're going to hear me say. Additive inverse and multiplicative inverse. So if you look at number 1, to get m by itself, remember you've got to do additive inverse here. You got to do the opposite. So if you want to zero it out. Well, what's going to zero out with 12? Negative 12. And whatever you do to one side, because it's the equality, whatever you do to one side, you do to the other side. And now, additive inverse cancels out, and it leaves me with m equals negative 2. Do not underestimate the power of checking your answer. If you want good grades and you want to do the best, you always check your answer. It takes 2 seconds. You can absolutely do that in your head. Take a negative 2 here. Is a negative 2 and a positive 12? You've got more positives than negatives. It is 10. Check your answer, check your answer. All right, number 2. So my goal here is to get g by itself, so I have to clear out this negative 9. What's additive inverse? Additive inverse is the opposite, so I'm going to add 9. Whatever you do to one side, you do to the other side. And so negative 2 plus 9 is 7 equals g. Do not give me this as your answer. What is my favorite property? Symmetric property. So I'm going to do g equals 7. That is a beautiful example of the symmetric property. All right, now number 3. This is multiplying, and the opposite of multiplication is division. Okay, it is. So I can divide both sides by negative 7. Both sides by negative 7. Negative divided by negative is a positive. Negative divided by negative is a positive, so I know it's going to be positive. 7 goes into 9 one whole time, with 2 left over. 7 goes into 21 3 times. So negative 7 times 13, negative times a positive is a negative, negative 91. Now, look at number 4. Multiplicative inverse. It is your best friend. If you embrace it, it will make your mathematical life so much easier. Okay, to get a by itself, we're going to do the multiplicative reciprocal. If you're dividing by 9, what's the opposite? You flip your reciprocal. Now, remember, the inverse doesn't have, I'm looking at the coefficient here of 1. This is 1. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip my reciprocals, and I'm going to multiply by 9 over 1. But in this case, I can just use 9 because it's simple that way. And whatever you do to one side, multiplying by 9, you do to the other side, multiplying by 9. So my 9s cancel out. I'm left with a equals negative 36. Okay, multiplicative inverse. Really, number 3 is also multiplicative inverse, because look what happens. If you turn that into a rational number, fits the form a over b, and you flip your reciprocal, 1 over negative 7, whatever you do to one side, you do to the other side. That cancels out to y. You cross reduce, and that's going to give you the same answer of 13. It still is multiplicative inverse. Multiplicative inverse, you flip your reciprocal. Your life will be so much easier once you learn to embrace that. All right, so just like down here. Okay, so on the fraction piece, to get rid of it, you use the multiplicative inverse, the reciprocal. That's it. It's just the property, multiplicative inverse. So if I want to get x by itself, I multiply by 3 over 2. Whatever you do to one side, you do to the other side. This skill that I promised you would be able to do in your head, now's the time. So cross reduce, you get 5. 5 times 3 is 15. Okay? Over here, the multiplicative inverse is 9/4. 9/4. Whatever you do to one side, you do to the other side. These guys cancel out. W equals, you got a negative going on here. Negative times a positive is a negative. Cross reduce, 2 times 9 is negative 18. Okay? Number 7, the multiplicative inverse is negative 5 over 6. Remember, multiplicative inverse, we want that to create that positive 1 value. So k has got to be positive. How do you do it? A negative times a negative. So whatever you do on one side, you're multiplying the same on the other side. So those guys cancel out, giving you k, and here I get a negative 10. Right? Over here, I'm multiplying both sides by a negative 2 over 1, or just negative 2. And I get m equals 18. All right, so that's just a refresher on the one-step equations. Two-step equations, which I know you have done, is exactly what it is. It's 2 steps, and it's either multiplicative inverse or additive inverse. That's it. Remember, your goal is to always get x by itself. So the first thing that we want to get rid of always is the constant term. Notice how much vocab I just said right there. I said multiplicative inverse or additive inverse, constant term, and coefficient. So when I mean you need to be able to understand the math, you need to be able to understand the language, the vocab that we're talking about. So constant term is that 8. I'm going to get rid of that first. So I'm going to use additive inverse. If it's positive 8, it's negative 8 on both sides. What's left? 6x equals 42. So now to get x by itself, I separate, I divide the 6 from the x. So I'm going to divide 6 on both sides, and I get x equals 7. Don't forget, always check your answer. It's worth it. 6 times 7, if x is 7, 6 times 7 is 42. 42 plus 8 is 50. All right? Over here, got to get rid of, my goal is to get n by itself. I got to get rid of the constant term, so I'm going to add 5 to both sides. Additive inverse. I'm left with 2n equals 16. Now I need to separate 2 from n. So separate means division, and I get n equals 8. Remember the power of checking. N times 8, or 2 times 8 is 16. 16 minus 5 is 11. It checks out. All right, so let's do a couple more. Let's go down here to where we get the fractions, because I know you guys have done this, so this is just kind of review for you. Let's look at 17 and 18. All right, so again, I want to get rid of my constant term. The target here is p, right? I want to get p by itself, so I'm going to get rid of this negative 10. Additive inverse, add 10 on both sides. I get 7/4 p equals a negative 28. And now to get p by itself, multiplicative inverse. That's it. Multiply both sides by 4 over 7. Whatever you do to one side, you do to the other side. You absolutely need to know how to do this in your head, right? So a negative times a positive is a negative. This cross reduces to 4. So 4 times 4 is 16. So negative 16. All right, over here. My goal is to get x by itself. So I got to get rid of the constant term, which is a positive 9. So additive inverse of a positive 9 is a negative 9. Subtract on both sides. I get 6 equals negative 1/2 x. So here I'm going to do the multiplicative inverse. So I'm multiplying by a negative 2, multiplying by a negative 2, and I get negative 12 equals x. Are you going to give me this answer? You are not. What property are you going to use? What? Yeah, the symmetric property. X equals negative 12. Okay? All right. Now, I want you to highlight this next part. It already says watch out, but this is a big one. This is a big one, and I see it a lot. So what do we do in a situation where we've got a fraction? Okay, we've got a 2-term fraction, right? We got a numerator with 2 terms and 1 denominator. So here, what you have to do is you got to get rid of your fraction first. So I want to keep x plus 11 as 1 term. So I'm going to multiply first 8 on both sides. That clears my fraction out, leaving me with x plus 11 equals negative 24. Do you see that difference? You got to clear out your fraction first. And then additive inverse, x equals negative 35. So if you look at number 20, clear out my fraction first by multiplying by negative 2. I'm left with n minus 5 equals positive 14. Be careful of those signs. That's a big deal. And then additive inverse, add 5 on both sides, n equals 19. Down here on 21, get rid of your fraction first. Multiply both sides by negative 6. So I get negative 6 equals a minus 13. Now to get a by itself, I use additive inverse by adding 13 to both sides. And I get 7 equals a. Are you going to give me that as your answer? You are not. You're going to use the symmetric property and give me a equals 7 is your final answer. All right, last one we're going to do together, number 22. Clear out that fraction first. Multiply by a 9 to get 36 equals w plus 8. Now your goal is to get w by itself. Additive inverse. You subtract 8 on both sides. So here I get 24. Is that right? And 28. I don't know what my problem is. 28 equals w, but are you going to give me that as your answer? Absolutely not. You are going to use what property? The symmetric property. That is right. So you're going to give me w equals 20. Okay, there it is for equations.